All right, so ready to deep dive into some serious global development theory? We're about to unpack what really drives sustainable growth.
Sounds like a plan. And I see you've brought some seriously fascinating sources to pick apart.
Oh yeah, we're going way beyond the buzzwords, getting into the nitty-gritty.
Love it. Let's do it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Let's kick things off with a bit of a blast from the past, shall we?
Hit me.
The Washington Consensus, remember that? Huge back in the late 20th century.
Right. Like the economic version of parachute pants.
Huh. Pretty much. But instead of fashion advice, it was all about telling developing countries how to run their economies.
Yeah, prescribed might be a better word than advice. A very specific economic prescription.
Exactly. Fiscal discipline, trade liberalization, privatization,
Yeah.
all the good stuff.
The idea was that if these struggling economies could just unleash the power of free markets, growth would just magically trickle down to everyone.
Sounds good on paper, I guess, but
Yeah.
did it actually work?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? See, the Washington Consensus came about during a very specific time in the 1980s. A lot of developing countries, especially in Latin America, were grappling with these massive debt crises, economic stagnation.
Right.
And back then, free markets and limited government, that was the economic gospel.
So same solution for every problem, like economic band-aids all around.
Pretty much. And that was a big part of the problem. They treated all these developing countries like they were all facing the same exact challenges, needing the same solutions. But economies, they're more like fingerprints, you know?
Each one is unique.
Yeah, exactly. So what might work wonders in one country could completely backfire in another. Take a look at figure 3.1 in that source you've got. It shows income growth in the U.S. Now, not exactly a developing country, but it illustrates the point perfectly.
Okay, I'm looking at it, yeah.
Between 1947 and 1979, income growth was pretty evenly spread out. But after 79, right when a lot of those Washington Consensus policies got rolling, the gains, they all went straight to the top.
Interesting. So even when there was growth, it wasn't exactly trickling down as promised.
Exactly. And that's where this one-size-fits-all approach really falls apart. What works in a country with a strong social safety net, for example, it could actually make inequality way worse in a country without those safety nets.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So if simply replicating the Washington Consensus wasn't the answer, how do we understand what drives real development? What were they missing?
Context. That's what they missed. They were so focused on these grand theories of free markets and minimal government that they forgot a really basic question.
What's that?
What's actually holding this specific economy back?
So instead of just assuming every country needs, the same economic aspirin, we need to diagnose the patient, figure out what's causing the headache in the first place.
Now you're getting it. That's where growth diagnostics comes in.
Growth diagnostics.
Yeah, think of it like, a doctor treating a patient. You wouldn't just prescribe a bunch of meds without figuring out the root cause of the illness.
Definitely not. I'd probably end up with gills or something.
Exactly. So economists Ricardo Hausman, Donny Roderick, and Andres Velasco, they came up with this really helpful framework.
Okay.
They basically said, hold on, let's stop assuming and start asking the right questions.
Which are?
Well, the first and most important one. What's the most significant constraint on economic growth in this particular country at this particular moment?
Is it a lack of investment?
Yeah.
Or is it a shortage of skilled labor? Or something completely different? Give me a case study. I'm ready.
All right, detective. Let's dive into those case studies from your source material. Brazil and El Salvador. Both countries adopted a lot of those Washington Consensus reforms, but the results. Very, very different.
Interesting. On the surface, they might seem similar, both facing economic challenges.
Right. But the key difference was the nature of their economic bottlenecks. See, Brazil, they had a ton of potential investment opportunities, natural resources, growing industrial sector, but they were struggling to get people to save money. It's like having a Michelin star chef, but no diners in the restaurant,
Okay. Lots of potential, but not enough capital to make it happen. So what about El Salvador?
Opposite problem. They actually had a decent savings rate,
Okay.
but they lacked attractive investment opportunities. So it's like having a packed restaurant, but all you're serving is instant ramen.
A recipe for economic heartburn, for sure.
Yeah.
So if you prescribe the same economic reforms for both, it's like giving them both the same medication, even though they have totally different illnesses.
Yeah. Exactly. Brazil needed policies that encouraged people to save maybe higher interest rates on savings accounts or tax incentives. But El Salvador, they needed to focus on attracting investment, creating a better business environment, streamlining regulations, things like that.
It's almost like economic acupuncture or something, right?
Love that. You got it, finding those specific pressure points
Yeah.
to unlock growth. So no more blindly copying and pasting policies. It's all about understanding the nuances of each economy and tailoring solutions accordingly.
The bespoke suit of economic policy.
I like it.
So we've officially debunked the one-size-fits-all myth. What's next? If we're moving beyond the Washington Consensus, what are some of the approaches that are gaining traction? So we're ditching the old economic cookbook, huh? What's the new recipe for successful development?
Well, if there were a single magic formula, we'd be out of a job, wouldn't we?
Ah, true, true.
But there are some key ingredients we see popping up again and again.
Okay, like what?
Strong institutions, for one.
Institutions, okay. Not talking about universities and libraries, are we?
Not quite. Think more like the rules of the game in an economy.
Okay.
Things like a reliable legal system, clear property rights, a government that's, actually accountable and transparent.
Got it.
These are crucial. Attracting investment, fostering innovation, making sure everyone has a real shot at success, it all comes back to that.
Creating a level playing field.
Yeah.
But also one that's, like, trustworthy, predictable.
Exactly. But, and this is a big but, those institutions can't just copy and paste them from somewhere else.
Right, of course.
They have to be tailored to a country's specific history, culture, social norms. What works in, say, Sweden might be a disaster in Zimbabwe,
So no more blindly copying those Western models.
Yeah, exactly. And another big shift, how we see the role of government. The old Washington Consensus, it was all about shrinking the state, remember?
Right.
But now there's this growing understanding that, well, markets aren't perfect, especially in developing economies.
They need a little help sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. You need the government to step in, fix things when the market fails, provide those essential public goods, make sure growth actually benefits everyone.
So not big government versus small government, but smart government.
Nailed it. Figuring out when to get involved, when to back off, how to create an environment where both markets and people can really thrive.
Which brings us to a fascinating case study. China.
Yeah. How'd you guess?
They kind of love doing things their own way, don't they? Didn't they manage to achieve incredible growth without completely embracing that Washington Consensus playbook?
They did. It really proves there are many paths to development. They weren't afraid to let the state be active in the economy, and they found some pretty innovative ways to use their strengths.
Like their township and village enterprises, the TVEs.
There you go. Kind of a hybrid between public and private.
Right.
Publicly owned, often at the local level, but with a lot of autonomy. They could respond to local conditions, experiment. They were a huge part of China's early economic transformation.
So the takeaway here is what? There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right. It's about finding the right combination, the policies, the institutions, the incentives that work for your specific context.
Yeah. And being brave enough to challenge assumptions. Experiment a little.
And learn from your mistakes. It's all part of the process.
This has been seriously thought-provoking. Okay, so for anyone listening who's now feeling ready to, write their PhD on global development, what's a final thought, something to really wrestle with?
Well, we've focused a lot on the economics today, but think about this. How do the social and political factors, things like culture, history, how a country is governed, how do those things influence the economic outcomes?
Oh, that's a good one.
It's a fascinating field, always evolving, never a dull moment.
Never a dull moment. I like it. Thanks for coming on the show and sharing your expertise. I've learned so much today.
It's been a pleasure. Glad to be here.